My son told the bank I had dementia. That's what the teller said to me, quietly, like she was ashamed to repeat it. She kept her eyes on the screen and her voice low, and she said, "There's a note on the account, ma'am. It says the primary account holder is no longer capable of managing her own finances." I had to ask her to say it again because I thought I'd misheard. I hadn't. I was standing in the branch of TD Bank on Morrison Street in Kitchener, Ontario, wearing my good wool coat, holding my purse with both hands, and someone my own son had told them I was incompetent. I'm 68 years old. I read the Globe and Mail every morning. I do the crossword in pen. The teller's name was Priya. She looked young enough to be my granddaughter, and she had the expression of someone who had stumbled onto something she hadn't been trained to handle. She glanced over her shoulder at her manager's office, then back at me, and said the words I would hear over and over again in the weeks that followed. "I'm going to need to get someone else involved." I told her to take her time. I wasn't going anywhere. I had been home from Riverview Rehabilitation Center for exactly 4 days. 6 weeks I had been there, recovering from the hip replacement I'd had in early February. 6 weeks in a room with beige walls and a window that looked out onto a parking lot, doing physiotherapy twice a day and eating meals I hadn't cooked myself for the first time in 40 years. My late husband Gerald had always said I was too stubborn to slow down. He was right. But a hip doesn't care how stubborn you are. My son had driven me to the hospital the morning of the surgery. He'd held my hand in the pre-op area, rubbed my knuckles with his thumb the way he used to do when he was small and frightened. He told me not to worry. He had everything handled. The house, the bills, the mail. He had the power of attorney I'd signed 3 years earlier after Gerald died, when the lawyer had said it was sensible, just in case something happened. A precaution, she'd called it. A kindness to myself. I had thought so too. The branch manager came out of his office. His name was Darren, and he had the practiced calm of someone who dealt with difficult situations often enough to have developed a script. He shook my hand and led me into a chair across from his desk and offered me water, which I declined. "Mrs. Alderton," he said, "your account has been placed under a third-party management directive." I looked at him. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning all transactions require co-authorization. In this case, the authorized party is listed as your son. "My son," I said. "Yes, ma'am." "And who authorized this directive?" He hesitated. "Your son submitted the documentation." "Did he submit documentation saying I had dementia?" Another pause. He looked at his screen. The file notes a physician's concern regarding cognitive capacity. "Which physician?" He turned the monitor slightly. I leaned forward and looked anyway. The name listed was a Dr. R. Fenton. I had never heard of him. My doctor, the one who had cleared me for surgery and monitored my recovery for the past 6 weeks, was Dr. Ann Mahone. She had offices on Weber Street, and she sent me birthday cards. She had never once suggested there was anything wrong with my mind. "I'd like to see the documentation," I said. "That's something you'd need to request through. I'd like to see it today." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he printed a copy and slid it across the desk. I read it carefully. It was a letter on clinic letterhead, signed by Dr. R. Fenton. It stated that I had been assessed and found to be exhibiting signs of moderate cognitive decline, and that it was recommended a trusted family member assume management of my financial affairs. The date on the letter was February 28th, the day I had been transferred to Riverview, still groggy from surgery, still wearing a hospital bracelet. I folded the letter and placed it in my purse. "I'll be back," I told Darren. I walked out into the thin March sunshine and stood on the pavement for a moment, the cold air cutting through my coat. Across the street, a Tim Hortons had its lights on. A woman pushed a stroller past me and didn't look up. The city moved around me the way it always did. Indifferent, ordinary. But something had shifted beneath my feet, the way ice does in early spring, solid-looking until you step on it. I had lived on Ferris Lane since 1988. The house was a semi-detached on a quiet street with old maples in the front yard that Gerald had planted the year we moved in. We'd raised our son there, and later, after Gerald passed, I'd stayed on because the neighborhood knew me, and I knew it, and because leaving felt like losing him twice. The house was modest. The mortgage had been paid off for 11 years. It was mine, free and clear. My son had the key. He'd always had the key. When I got home, I noticed things I hadn't on the first day back. I'd been tired then, focused on getting the kettle on and sleeping in my own bed. But now I walked through the room slowly. The filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one Gerald called the war room, was unlocked. It was always locked. The key hung on a hook inside the pantry. I opened the drawers one by one. The folder labeled Bank and Financial was thin, nearly empty. The statements that should have been there, a full year's worth of records, were gone. The folder labeled Property still had the original deed, but the stack of utility bills I kept filed by month was missing. The folder for Gerald's life insurance, the payout we had used carefully and never touched recklessly, had only the original policy certificate left inside. The quarterly statements were gone. I sat down on the edge of the spare bed and made myself breathe. My son had been in this room. That night, I called my sister. She lives in Halifax, and we talk every Sunday, but this was a Thursday and she answered on the second ring because she always answers on the second ring. I told her what the bank had said. I told her about the letter from the doctor I'd never met. I told her about the filing cabinet. She was quiet for a moment. "How much do you think is gone?" she asked. "I don't know yet." "Do you have your online banking password?" He changed it. Another silence. Then she said, "You need to call someone tomorrow, first thing. Not your son. A lawyer." "I know," I said. "And you need to check your OAS and CPP, if he got into those." "I know," I said again. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about the morning he'd driven me to the hospital. How he'd hugged me at the doors of the surgical ward and said he'd be there when I woke up. He wasn't. A nurse told me, when I came around, that my family had been called but hadn't made it in time. I'd thought nothing of it then. He had a job, a family of his own. Traffic on the 401 is always a disaster. I'd thought nothing of any of it. You don't, when it's your child. You fill in the gaps with love, and you call it understanding. The next morning, I called Service Canada. I was on hold for 22 minutes. The hold music was the kind that seems specifically designed to make you feel your time doesn't matter. When someone finally answered, a man named Patrick with a maritime accent, I gave him my name and social insurance number and asked about my CPP and OAS deposits. "Let me pull that up," he said. A pause. "Your direct deposit information was updated on March 3rd. "Updated how?" "The deposits are now going to a different account." "Whose account?" "I'm showing joint authorization under a power of attorney. The deposits are going to an account under the name of your son." I wrote that down. March 3rd. I had been at Riverview since February 28th. He had moved within 5 days of me leaving the house. Patrick walked me through the dispute process. I would need to submit a written declaration, a copy of government ID, and a letter from a lawyer or notary attesting to my legal capacity. I could also file a report with the RCMP. He said the last part carefully, like he wasn't sure I would want to hear it. "Thank you, Patrick," I said. "You've been very helpful." My neighbor Elaine came over that afternoon with a container of soup she'd made from scratch. She's been on Ferris Lane almost as long as I have, and she has the particular quality of a good neighbor, which is that she shows up when something feels wrong without waiting to be asked. She set the soup on the counter and looked at my face. "What happened?" she said. I told her. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. The bank, the doctor's note, the CPP deposits. She listened without interrupting, which not everyone is good at. When I finished, she said, "Is the house okay? Your deed?" I hadn't thought to check. She drove me to the land registry office. We sat together in the waiting area, and I filled out the request form, and 30 minutes later a clerk handed me a printout. The title to my house was unchanged, my name only. Gerald's name removed after probate, as it should have been. But there was a note attached. A registered lien had been placed on the property on March 9th, citing a personal loan agreement. The creditor was listed as a numbered company I'd never heard of. I looked at the printout for a long time. Elaine said nothing. She just reached over and put her hand on mine. A numbered company. My son was not a complicated man. He sold commercial heating equipment and coached his daughter's soccer team on weekends. He didn't run numbered companies. Someone was helping him. The lawyer's name was Catherine Martell. She had offices in a building on Queen Street, second floor, above a pharmacy. Her receptionist gave me tea without asking, which I appreciated. When Catherine came in, she was maybe 50, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the direct, unhurried manner of someone who had heard difficult things many times and wasn't frightened by them. She read everything I'd brought. The bank directive, the letter from Dr. R. Fenton, the Service Canada record, the property note. She read slowly, going back to certain pages twice. When she finished, she set the folder down and looked at me. "This is a fairly comprehensive abuse of power of attorney," she said. "The physician's letter concerns me most. Do you know this Dr. Fenton? I've never heard of him. The address on the letterhead is a walk-in clinic in Cambridge. Do you have any connection to Cambridge?" "None." She wrote something down. "Then I'll be looking into whether he actually assessed you and under what circumstances that letter was generated." She set her pen down. "Mrs. Alderton, I want to be direct with you. What you're describing, the fraudulent incapacity letter, the redirection of pension benefits, the property lien, these aren't mistakes. This was planned." "Yes," I said. "I know. I can move to revoke the POA immediately, which will re-establish your full financial authority. We can also file a complaint with the Ontario Retirement Communities regulatory body if needed, and I'll be sending a notice to TD, Service Canada, and the Land Registry today. The lien is questionable and likely fraudulent. We can apply to have it removed." She paused. "I do need to ask, do you want to involve the police?" I had asked myself that question all the previous night. "Yes," I said. "I want everything on record." She nodded. "Then I'll also help you file a report with the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit." "How long will all of this take?" "The revocation, a few days. The investigation, longer. Months, possibly." I looked out her window at Queen Street below. A streetcar was moving slowly through the intersection. A man was walking a very small dog. "I've got time," I said. The hardest part wasn't the bank. The hardest part was not calling my son. Every morning for the first week, I would sit with my tea and look at the phone and think about what I would say if I called him. Sometimes what I imagined was quiet and careful. Other times, it wasn't. The truth is, I already knew what he would say. He would say he did it for me. He would say I hadn't been myself, that he'd been worried, that he was just trying to help, that he was going to put it all back. He always had an answer ready. He got that from his father, who was also charming and also sometimes wrong. I didn't call. Instead, I made lists. Every institution that had my son's name on something that shouldn't, my electricity account with Kitchener Utilities, transferred to his name on March 4th. My Enbridge gas account, March 6th. My internet service, March 10th. A whole house, slowly and quietly signed over to someone else, the way you might reroute mail when you know someone is leaving. He'd even changed the address on my property tax file. I discovered that at the municipal office, where a clerk named Hannah was mortified on my behalf and corrected it on the spot while apologizing 3 times. I told her none of it was her fault. My CPP and OAS combined came to just under $1,800 a month. Over 6 weeks, that was roughly $2,700 redirected into my son's account. But the pension deposits were not the main thing. The main thing was the savings account Gerald and I had built over 40 years of careful living. It held $61,400 when I went into surgery. When Catherine obtained the account records, it held $3,200. The rest had been moved in 5 transactions between February 28th and March 14th. 3 transfers to my son's personal account, 1 transfer to the numbered company, 1 payment to a private mortgage broker. The private mortgage broker concerned Catherine most. It suggested he had tried to refinance the house. The lien was likely the collateral. If I had stayed at Riverview longer, or hadn't thought to check, he might have succeeded. $68,000, Elaine said when I told her. We were at her kitchen table. She made the kind of coffee that comes out of a proper pot, not a machine. Helen, I'm so sorry. 61 from savings. The rest from the pension rerouting. And he did this while you were in the rehab center. While I was doing leg raises in a hospital gown, I said. Yes. She shook her head slowly. She'd known my son since he was 12 years old. He used to shovel her art neighbors in winter and refuse the $5 she tried to give him because his father had told him you don't charge neighbors. Did his wife know? She asked. That I didn't know. It kept me awake. My daughter-in-law was a quiet woman who taught elementary school and had always been polite to me in the slightly formal way of someone who is being careful. We weren't close, but I hadn't thought we were enemies. She had brought me flowers at Riverview, yellow tulips, which I'd thought was a thoughtful choice. Had she known then what had already been done? The RCMP officer who took my statement was a woman named Constable Dempster. She was younger than I expected and very thorough. She asked me to walk her through everything in order, and she wrote it down without rushing me. When I got to the part about the physician's letter, she stopped me. Has Dr. Fenton been contacted? My lawyer is handling that. We'll follow up independently, she said. If the letter was fabricated, that's a separate offense. Potentially fraud on a medical professional as well. Do you think he had someone write it for him? It's not uncommon in cases like this, she said carefully, for the perpetrator to have assistants. I thought about my son's wife and her tulips. I said nothing. I hadn't seen my grandson since before the surgery. He was 17 and doing his OAC year, the kind of busy that teenagers describe as unbearable and then remember fondly when it's over. He had texted me once while I was at Riverview. A brief message. Hope you're feeling better, Grandma. Talk soon. I had replied with a heart emoji, because I was still learning how to use them. I didn't know what he knew. The revocation of the power of attorney came through in 4 days, as Catherine had promised. I got a notification letter, signed and notarized, and I made 3 copies. I walked into TD Bank and handed one to Darren, who received it with visible relief. The third-party management directive was removed from my account the same afternoon. I sat in the branch and watched them restore my access in real time, and when the screen showed my name as the sole authorized account holder, I sat with that for a moment. It had been 7 weeks since I'd been able to see my own balance. On the way home, I stopped at the pharmacy on Queen Street, the one beneath Catherine's office. I bought a new notebook, the kind with a hard cover and lined pages. On the bus back to Ferris Lane, I opened it to the first page and wrote, at the top, what I know, what I can prove, what comes next. That night, my son called. I looked at his name on the screen for a long time. Mum, he said when I answered. I think we should talk. He sounded like himself. He always sounded like himself. That was always the thing about him. Yes, I said. We should. I've been hearing some things. From the bank. And from Catherine Martel's office. Good, I said. Then you don't need me to explain. A pause. Mum, I want you to understand after Dad died, and then when you had the surgery, I was worried. You weren't yourself. I was in hospital, I said. That's not the same thing. I know, but you told the bank I had dementia, I said. I don't. You know I don't. Silence. You moved $61,000 out of my account in 2 weeks, I continued. You redirected my pension. You put a lien on the house your father and I paid off together. You changed the address on my property tax file. You did all of this while I was learning to walk again. He didn't say anything for a long time. I was going to put it back, he said finally. There it was. I know, I said. You were going to put it all back. I was in a bad spot financially. The heating company was struggling, and— Stop, I said. Don't tell me about the heating company. His voice changed then. Something harder came into it. You were going to give it to me eventually anyway. You've always said the house would come to me. Eventually, I said. While I'm still alive and living in it. Mum, don't, I said. You had a choice. You had 100 choices. You could have told me you were struggling. You could have asked. I have never, in your whole life, said no to you when you genuinely needed something. But instead of asking, you waited until I was sedated on a gurney, and then you helped yourself. The silence between us was long and full. I'm pressing charges, I said. My lawyer has filed with the RCMP. The lien is being contested. I want every dollar back, and I want it on record. He said my name, just my name, and the way he said it was something I hadn't heard from him in years. Like a child. Like the boy who used to cry during thunderstorms. I hung up. I sat for a while in the quiet kitchen, with the phone in my hand. Outside, the maples Gerald had planted were starting to bud. The street was ordinary and still. Somewhere down the block, a dog was barking. There is a grief that comes from knowing someone completely and losing them anyway, not to death, to who they decided to become. I had a folder now that Catherine called the evidence package. It was thick, well organized, color-coded with sticky tabs. It held every bank record, every utility transfer, every Service Canada document, the forged physician's letter, the property lien, the land registry notes. I had written a 6-page statement, dated and signed, that walked through every event in chronological order. Catherine had reviewed it 3 times. The RCMP opened a formal investigation 4 weeks after I filed. The officer handling it was not Constable Dempster, but a detective named Renaud, who called me every 2 weeks with updates. He had the same thorough quietness as Dempster. He told me they were looking into Dr. R. Fenton, whose signature appeared on several similar letters filed at 3 different financial institutions in the Waterloo region over the past 2 years. My son was not the only one who had visited that clinic. I did not share this with him. I let Renaud tell me, and I wrote it in my notebook, and I put the notebook back in the drawer. My daughter-in-law called once. She said she hadn't known the full extent of it. She said she'd known things were bad financially, that there had been conversations about my assets, but she hadn't known he'd gone this far. I listened and said nothing encouraging and nothing dismissive. When she asked if we could talk again, I said I needed time, and she accepted that with the quiet dignity of someone who knew they had no standing to push. My grandson came by on a Saturday. He knocked instead of letting himself in, which he'd never done before, and when I opened the door, he looked like someone who had practiced what he wanted to say and then forgotten it. "Hi, Grandma." "Come in?" I said. "I'll put the kettle on." He sat at the kitchen table and turned his phone over and over in his hands. He was tall now, taller than his father, with Gerald's same square jaw. He had his mother's eyes. "I didn't know," he said. "I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said. But I think I knew something was off, and I didn't ask. I set 2 mugs down and sat across from him. "Why didn't you?" I asked. He looked at the table. "Because I thought if I asked, I'd have to do something about it. And I didn't know what." I looked at him for a moment. He was 17. He was still figuring out how to carry things. "That's honest," I said. "That's more than most people give me." He looked up. "Are you going to be okay?" "Yes," I said. "It'll take time, but yes." He nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the table between us. A photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly wrinkled at the edges. Gerald and me, standing in front of the house, in what must have been the mid-90s, both squinting into summer light. Gerald had his hand on my shoulder. "I found it in a box in the garage," my grandson said. "Dad had a bunch of your stuff sorted. I kept this one." I picked it up. Gerald had been gone for 3 years. In the photo, he looked the way I still thought of him. Solid, unhurried, there. "Thank you," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't knock on your door sooner," he said. "I should have." "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded. He didn't ask to be forgiven, which was the right instinct. Some things take longer than one conversation. When he left, I put the photograph on the shelf beside the window, facing the maples. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in late April. The courtroom was small and plain, the way courts often are when the cases inside them are anything but. Catherine sat beside me. The prosecutor, a woman named Alfonsi, had a thick binder and the composed expression of someone who knew exactly what they were going to say. My son sat across the room with his lawyer, a man I didn't recognize. He didn't look at me when I came in. He looked at the table, and then at the wall, and then at his own hands. He was wearing the Navy suit he'd worn to Gerald's funeral. I noticed that, and then I put it away. The judge reviewed the charges: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud over $5,000, forgery in relation to a document, misuse of a power of attorney for personal gain. She read them steadily, without drama. 4 counts. When she asked if he understood the charges, his lawyer spoke for him. He entered a guilty plea on all counts. I had known this was likely, had asked Catherine to prepare me for it. I had told myself it would feel like something clean, something final. In the courtroom, it felt smaller than I expected. Not bad small, just true to scale small. The way resolution actually feels, which is less like a door slamming and more like a window opening in a room that's been shut for a long time. The judge imposed a sentence of 12 months house arrest, 2 years probation, and a full restitution order, every dollar to the last cent, including legal costs. She noted, for the record, that the forged physician's letter represented a particularly serious breach, as it had deliberately undermined my legal standing while I was physically vulnerable. She used the word premeditated. She used it twice. He still didn't look at me. Outside the courthouse, the sky was doing what April skies in Ontario do, threatening rain but not committing to it. Catherine walked beside me, and we didn't talk much. When we reached the corner, she stopped. "That's 1 chapter, she said. "1, I agreed. "What do you need now?" I thought about it. "A notary," I said. "I want to update my will and revoke everything that still has his name attached to anything." She smiled. A small, tired smile. "I can do that." I thanked her and walked to the bus stop alone. The restitution came in over 4 months, court-ordered and tracked by Catherine's office, because courts have a way of scheduling payments that feels designed to test your patience. But it came. The lien on the house was discharged in May. My Service Canada deposits were returned to my own account in April. By midsummer, the savings account was restored to just under $58,000. Not everything. Legal costs and interest don't repay themselves. But enough. More than enough to feel like my own life again. I went back to the bank on Morrison Street in August. Not because I had to. I just wanted to. Priya was behind the teller counter. She recognized me immediately, and for a moment, she looked the way people do when they're not sure whether to acknowledge something or pretend it didn't happen. I saved her the trouble. "Everything's been sorted," I told her. She let out a breath. "I'm really glad to hear that." "You did the right thing," I said. "You could have sent me away. You didn't." She looked pleased and a bit relieved. "I just thought you came in to pick up something that belonged to you. That seemed like it mattered." "It did," I told her. "It mattered very much." On the way home, I stopped at the library. I hadn't been since before the surgery, and my library card, which I'd had since 1991, was still good. The librarian at the desk, a man who had been there almost as long as the card, waved when he saw me. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. "I was away," I said. "But I'm back now. I took my time in the stacks. I came home with 3 books, a mystery, a gardening memoir, and a very long novel about a woman who outlasts everyone who underestimates her." That night, Elaine came for supper. She brought wine, the good kind she kept for occasions, and I made the roast chicken Gerald always said was the best thing I cooked. We sat at the kitchen table with the window open and the light going golden, and she said, "You look like yourself again." "I feel like myself," I said. "Maybe more so." She tilted her head. "You know what they don't tell you," I said, "about being wronged by someone you love? They don't tell you that you spend years shrinking yourself down so they have enough room. You stop noticing you're doing it. You call it being generous. You call it being a good mother." Elaine was quiet. "And then someone takes everything you have, and all the shrinking you did doesn't protect you from anything. It just means you have to rebuild yourself from a smaller space." "And?" she said softly. "And it turns out that's still enough," I said. "It turns out there was more of me left than either of us counted on." She raised her glass. I raised mine. The maples were full out now, wide and green over the front yard, the way Gerald always said they'd be once they had time to grow. He had been right about that, too. I would not say I forgave my son. Forgiveness is its own thing, with its own timeline, and it isn't owed to anyone on demand. What I can say is that I stopped waiting for him to explain himself in a way that would make sense, because that explanation does not exist. Some people take because they can, and they justify it with the words, "You won't need this forever," or "I was going to put it back," or "You always said it would come to me." And you can argue with those words forever, or you can simply stop offering the argument and start building the wall. I changed my will. I changed my locks. I changed my emergency contact at the hospital to Elaine. I set up automatic alerts on my bank accounts that text me every time a dollar moves. I also took down the photo of my son from the shelf in the hallway. Not because I wanted to pretend he didn't exist, but because you don't have to display someone's face in your own house just because you share a last name. Gerald's photo is still there. And the one my grandson brought me. The two of us in front of the maples, blinking in the summer light. If you've been reading this, if any part of this sounds familiar, not the exact details, but the weight of it, the particular exhaustion of being loved in ways that cost you everything, then I want you to hear this. You are allowed to protect yourself from people who hurt you, even when those people are family. Especially when those people are family, because those are the ones who know exactly which doors to try. Do not wait for someone to come save you. Write things down. Call the bank. Find a Catherine Martell. Start from wherever you are, with whatever is left. Because I promise you, there is more left than you think. And if they bet on your silence, let that be the last mistake they make.